I never imagined my own daughter would throw me onto a mattress on the laundry room floor. Better than nothing, right? Tiffany smirked after our house division was finalized. The hurt cut deep as I lay there that first night, surrounded by detergent bottles and dirty clothes. What my daughter didn't know was that I had already transferred all my assets weeks ago during my supposed mental decline. Sometimes the best revenge requires patience, especially when you're sleeping in the laundry room. If you want to know how I went from sleeping on a laundry room floor to reclaiming my dignity and teaching my ungrateful daughter a lesson she'll never forget, keep watching until the end. Before I continue my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this family drama unfolds. My name is Donna Williams, and at 65 years old, I never expected to be starting over. Just 3 years ago, my life seemed complete. Howard, my husband of 42 years, and I had built a beautiful life together in our 2-story colonial home in Westfield. We had worked hard for everything we owned, saved diligently, and planned for a comfortable retirement. Howard always joked that our house had a room for every happy memory we'd collected. The sunroom where we'd watch thunderstorms together, the kitchen where we'd dance while making Sunday breakfast, and the garden where Howard proposed to me a second time on our 30th anniversary. When Howard passed away from heart failure, the silence in our home became unbearable. Our only child, Tiffany, seemed genuinely concerned about me living alone. "Mom, you shouldn't be rattling around in this big house by yourself," she'd say during her weekly visits. I admit, the loneliness was crushing me. So when Tiffany suggested that she, her husband Craig, and my grandchildren move in temporarily, it seemed like the perfect solution. "It'll be good for everyone," Tiffany insisted. "Mason and Brianna will get to spend more time with their grandmother, and Craig and I can help maintain the house. Plus, you won't be alone anymore." Mason was 15, a quiet boy who reminded me so much of Howard with his thoughtful nature and love of baseball. Brianna, 12, was all personality and energy, constantly performing dance routines she learned from social media. I looked forward to filling the house with family again. At first, things were wonderful. Breakfast conversations, movie nights, helping with homework. I felt useful and connected again. Howard had left me financially secure with our savings, investments, and a generous life insurance policy. The house was paid off, and I had no money worries. I happily covered most household expenses, considering it a fair exchange for the company and help. But looking back, I should have noticed the warning signs. My friend Margaret certainly did. "Donna, honey, are you sure this arrangement is working for you?" she asked over coffee about 2 months after my family moved in. "You seem tense." "Everything's fine," I assured her, though even as I said it, I recognized the tightness in my shoulders. "We're just adjusting to living together." Margaret wasn't convinced. "I notice you're not gardening anymore. And didn't you mention Tiffany suggested you move your craft supplies to the basement?" It was true. Small changes had begun. My craft room had been converted to a home office for Craig. My gardening schedule had to accommodate Brianna's backyard activities. But these seemed like reasonable compromises for a multi-generational household. What I didn't tell Margaret was how Tiffany had begun checking my medication, questioning my memory when I misplaced things, and gently but firmly taking over bill payments, to make things easier for you, Mom. Tiffany had changed since marrying Craig 12 years ago. The sweet, considerate daughter I raised had become increasingly materialistic and status-conscious. Craig worked in finance, but never seemed to advance as quickly as Tiffany wanted. They lived beyond their means, something Howard and I had warned against. Their previous house was impressive but stretched their budget thin. 8 months into our living arrangement, the dynamic had shifted dramatically. I no longer felt like the homeowner, but more like a guest who needed to ask permission. Tiffany monitored my comings and goings, always under the guise of concern. "Mom, you forgot to tell me you were going to Margaret's. I was worried sick." Or, "Mom, I noticed you bought ice cream again. With your cholesterol, you really shouldn't." Craig was less direct, but equally problematic. He'd make comments like, "This house is really too big for just one person," or "You're lucky to have us here taking care of everything." He'd reorganize things without asking, claiming efficiency as the reason. The grandchildren's attitudes shifted too. Mason remained respectful but increasingly distant, absorbed in his phone whenever I tried to connect. Brianna began mimicking her mother's condescending tone. "Grandma, did you forget again? Mom already told you we're using the living room tonight for my sleepover." I found myself retreating to my bedroom more often, the only space that still felt truly mine. But even that sanctuary was about to be compromised in ways I could never have imagined. One Sunday evening in October, Tiffany called a family meeting in the living room. Craig sat beside her on the sofa, his expression serious but with an undercurrent of satisfaction that made me uneasy. Mason and Brianna were sent upstairs, unusual for family discussions. "Mom," Tiffany began, her voice gentle in that way that now set off alarm bells in my head. "We need to talk about formalizing our living arrangements." "Formalizing?" I asked, confused. "What do you mean?" Craig leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. "Donna, we've been living together almost a year now. It makes sense to establish some clear boundaries for everyone's comfort." "The house works fine as it is," I said, though that wasn't entirely true. I'd been feeling increasingly pushed aside in my own home. Tiffany shook her head. "It doesn't, Mom. There's tension. We need defined spaces. This house is so big, there's no reason we can't divide it more efficiently." "Divide it?" The word struck me like a physical blow. "We've talked to a family attorney," Craig continued smoothly. "Nothing too complicated. Just a formal agreement about which parts of the house are yours and which are ours. Shared spaces, private spaces, that sort of thing." I felt ambushed but tried to remain calm. "This is my house. Howard and I paid for it. I don't see why we need legal documents to live together as a family." Tiffany's eyes immediately welled with tears, a tactic she'd used since childhood when she didn't get her way. "I can't believe you'd say that. After everything we've done for you, Dad would have wanted us to stay together as a family. He wouldn't want you rattling around alone in this big house." The manipulation was obvious, but it still struck its target. Howard had always prioritized family unity. Would he have wanted me to insist on my property rights at the expense of our daughter's feelings? "Let's at least meet with the attorney," Craig suggested reasonably, "just to discuss options. No decisions have to be made right away." I reluctantly agreed, more to end the uncomfortable conversation than anything else. 2 days later, we sat in Franklin Davidson's office, our family attorney who had handled Howard's will and our estate planning for decades. I felt reassured by his familiar presence, though I noticed he seemed surprised by the purpose of our visit. "A house division agreement?" Franklin asked, looking between us. "Donna, is this something you want to pursue?" Before I could answer, Tiffany jumped in. "It's best for everyone, Franklin. Mom gets confused sometimes, and clear boundaries will help her feel secure." I bristled at the characterization but stayed quiet, watching Franklin's reaction. Tiffany presented a neatly typed proposal. Under their plan, I would retain the master bedroom and bathroom, have access to the kitchen during designated hours, and use of the living room from morning until 4 p.m. They would take the entire second floor, except my bedroom, the finished basement, and control of the common areas in the evenings. "This seems very restrictive," Franklin commented, looking at me with concern. "It's for Mom's safety and comfort," Tiffany insisted. "She gets overwhelmed managing the whole house." Franklin turned to me directly. "Donna, is this arrangement acceptable to you?" I felt trapped. Refusing would cause a family conflict, possibly resulting in them moving out. Despite everything, I dreaded returning to solitude. And Tiffany knew exactly which emotional buttons to push. "Dad always said family should stick together," she reminded me, her voice breaking slightly. "This is just a way to make sure we all have our own space while staying together." In a moment of weakness I would come to deeply regret, I nodded. "We can try it." Franklin still seemed troubled but prepared preliminary papers, emphasizing that I would maintain full ownership of the property. This was merely a living arrangement agreement, not a transfer of property rights. "I'll have the final documents prepared for your review," he said as we left. "Donna, call me if you have any questions or concerns. Anytime." I caught the emphasis in his words, but was too emotionally drained to respond properly. The changes began immediately, even before the papers were signed. My things began migrating from common areas into my bedroom. The living room was rearranged to accommodate Brianna's dance practice. The kitchen cabinets were reorganized so that my things were all in one section. Then came my health scare. A minor stroke left me hospitalized for 3 days. Nothing permanently debilitating, but it shook my confidence and left me temporarily weaker on my right side. Tiffany used this as justification to accelerate the takeover. The doctor said you need rest and reduce stress. She reminded me constantly. Let us handle things. Handling things meant intercepting my mail, answering my phone, scheduling my appointments, and further restricting my movements around the house. For my own good, of course. The grandchildren became increasingly distant. Mason would offer apologetic smiles but rarely engaged in conversation anymore. Brianna openly referred to areas of the house as ours versus Grandma's part, occasionally asking permission for me to join family activities in their spaces. I was becoming a guest in my own home, and my health issues made it difficult to fight back effectively. By the time I regained my strength, the new normal had been established. I found myself apologizing for intruding in my own living room after 4 p.m., or asking permission to use the washing machine on non-scheduled days. It was during my recovery that I first met Vanessa Porter, a friend of Tiffany's who worked in elder care. She would visit occasionally, engaging me in conversation while Tiffany hovered nearby. Only later did I realize these visits had a purpose beyond friendship. Vanessa was assessing me, likely advising Tiffany on how to document behaviors that could suggest cognitive decline. The situation reached a critical point 3 months after my stroke. I was feeling much stronger and had begun questioning some of Tiffany and Craig's decisions. One afternoon, I overheard them in the kitchen, not realizing I was in the nearby pantry. The division agreement isn't enough, Craig was saying. We need power of attorney. The medical and financial kind. She'll never agree to that, Tiffany responded. Not yet. Vanessa says we need to document everything. Forgetfulness, confusion, poor decisions. Build a case. I know, Tiffany sighed. I've been keeping notes. But we need more time. I quietly slipped out of the pantry and back to my room, heart pounding. The full extent of their plans was becoming clear, and I needed to act before it was too late. After overhearing Craig and Tiffany's conversation about seeking power of attorney, I began paying closer attention to everything happening around me. My recovery was progressing well, but I decided to appear slightly more confused and dependent than I actually was. It wasn't difficult to do. When you're constantly told you're forgetful, it becomes easier to play into that expectation. One Tuesday morning, I was searching for my bank statement which should have arrived days ago. After checking my designated mail spot on the kitchen counter and finding nothing, I approached Tiffany in her home office, formerly my sewing room. Have you seen my bank statement? It usually comes around the 15th, I asked casually. Tiffany barely glanced up from her computer. I put it with your other financial papers in the filing cabinet. I organized everything for you. I don't remember asking you to do that, I said carefully. Tiffany finally looked at me, her expression a perfect blend of patience and concern. Mom, we talked about this. You asked me to help with the bills and paperwork after your stroke. The doctor said stress isn't good for you. I had never agreed to this arrangement, but confronting her directly would only reinforce the narrative that I was becoming combative and paranoid. Instead, I nodded and thanked her, then waited until the house was empty the next day to investigate the filing cabinet in Tiffany and Craig's bedroom. What I discovered sent ice through my veins. Not only had they been opening all my mail, but there were meticulous notes documenting my concerning behaviors. Times I'd forgotten where I placed my glasses, occasions when I'd repeated a story. Normal senior moments exaggerated and catalogued as evidence of declining capacity. More alarming were printouts of my investment accounts and bank statements with highlighted sections and annotations. Craig had been researching my finances in detail. A separate folder contained information about guardianship proceedings and requirements for proving mental incompetence. They were building a case to take control of everything. That evening, I confronted Tiffany about the mail. I'd prefer to receive my own correspondence, I said firmly while we prepared dinner. It's no trouble, Mom. I'm happy to help sort it. It's not about trouble. It's about my privacy. Tiffany set down the knife she was using to chop vegetables and turned to me with that same concerned expression. Is everything okay? You seem agitated lately. I'm not agitated. I'm setting a boundary. A boundary, she repeated, as if the concept was foreign when applied to me. Mom, I'm only doing what's best for you. After your stroke, the doctor said. I know what my doctor said. I interrupted. And he never suggested I needed someone to read my mail. Tiffany's expression hardened momentarily before softening into concern again. This is exactly why I'm worried. These mood swings, this paranoia. It's not like you. Before I could respond, the front door opened and Vanessa walked in without knocking. Her timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Hope I'm not interrupting, she called cheerfully, entering the kitchen. I brought those herbal supplements we talked about, Tiffany. The conversation naturally shifted, and my concerns were brushed aside. This pattern repeated over the following weeks. Any attempt to assert independence was met with concern about my mental state, often with a conveniently timed interruption by Craig, the children, or Vanessa. Tiffany's campaign extended beyond our home. I discovered she had been speaking to neighbors about my condition, instructing them to contact her directly if they saw me out alone. My friend Margaret confirmed this when she called, furious after Tiffany had approached her at the grocery store. She told me you've been having episodes of confusion and shouldn't be driving, Margaret fumed. Donna, what on earth is going on in that house? I couldn't bring myself to fully explain how bad things had become. Pride, perhaps, or fear that speaking it aloud would make it more real. Instead, I assured Margaret I was fine, just dealing with some family adjustments. 6 months after my stroke, Tiffany announced another family meeting. This time, Vanessa was present as a neutral third party. Craig had prepared a slideshow on the living room television, complete with photographs of the house divided into color-coded sections. We've been operating under an informal arrangement, he explained professionally. But it's time to make things official. For everyone's peace of mind, the new proposal was far more restrictive than the original. My space would be limited to my bedroom and bathroom, with scheduled access to common areas. The justification was my increasing confusion and safety concerns that were entirely fabricated. Franklin arrived with documents for what Tiffany called the final division agreement. I noticed he seemed uncomfortable, avoiding direct eye contact with Tiffany and Craig. When he handed me the papers, he emphasized certain sections with his finger, drawing my attention to specific clauses. Take your time to read everything thoroughly, Donna, he said meaningfully. Make sure you understand all the implications before signing. As I reviewed the document, I noticed the property ownership remained in my name, but the usage rights were heavily restricted. A handwritten note at the bottom of one page caught my eye. Call me privately. Important. Franklin had scribbled it discreetly. I signed the papers with a subtle modification to my signature, something Howard and I had established years ago as a signal of duress. Franklin noticed immediately, his eyes widening slightly before he composed his expression. Everything appears to be in order, he announced, gathering the papers. I'll file these and provide copies to everyone. The moment the door closed behind Franklin, the atmosphere in the house changed dramatically. Tiffany's solicitous concern vanished, replaced by brisk efficiency. Craig began making phone calls, arranging for something that wasn't clear to me yet. The next morning, I woke to the sound of furniture being moved. When I opened my bedroom door, I found 3 men carrying my bed, dresser, and nightstand down the hallway. What's happening? I demanded, clutching my robe around me. Tiffany appeared from the master bathroom, directing the movers. Oh good, you're up. We're making some adjustments now that the agreement is finalized. Adjustments? Those are my things. Yes, and they're being moved to your new space, she explained as if speaking to a child. I followed the movers downstairs, through the kitchen, and into the laundry room at the back of the house. They were setting up my bedroom furniture in the narrow space between the washing machine and the water heater. A thin mattress lay on the floor where my bed would clearly not fit. This is the laundry room, I stated, stunned by the audacity. It's your new room, Tiffany corrected. The agreement gives us discretion to allocate spaces for optimal household function. I never agreed to live in the laundry room. Craig appeared behind me. Actually, you did. Section 4. Paragraph 3 gives us authority to reassign spaces as needed. Franklin pointed it out specifically. This is ridiculous. I'm not sleeping in a laundry room. Tiffany sighed dramatically. Mom, we need your bedroom for Mason. He's a growing boy and needs his privacy. This space is perfectly adequate for your needs. We've added a curtain for privacy, see? She gestured to a flimsy shower curtain hanging from a tension rod. Where are the rest of my things? I asked, noticing only a fraction of my belongings had been brought down. We've donated what you don't need, Craig explained. Decluttering is important at your age. I stood there in shock, unable to process the cruelty of what was happening. When I finally found my voice to protest further, Tiffany cut me off with a dismissive wave. The decision is made, Mom. The papers are signed. She gestured to the mattress on the floor. Better than nothing, right? The casual cruelty of that statement burned into my memory as I watched my daughter walk away, leaving me standing in my new bedroom, surrounded by laundry detergent and dirty clothes baskets. What she didn't know was that the papers she thought gave her control were not as binding as she believed. And I had already set in motion a plan that would turn her smug certainty into shock. That first night in the laundry room was one of the lowest points of my life. The thin mattress did little to cushion against the hard concrete floor. The constant hum of the water heater made sleep nearly impossible. Worst of all was the smell, a mixture of detergent, fabric softener, and the musty odor of damp clothes forgotten in the washing machine. I lay awake for hours, curled up in a ball, trying to come to terms with how dramatically my life had changed. Just 3 years ago, Howard and I had been planning our retirement travels. Now I was essentially homeless in my own home, relegated to sleeping on the floor of a laundry room. Physical discomfort aside, the emotional pain was far worse. My own daughter had done this to me. Tiffany, whom Howard and I had given everything to, who had never wanted for anything growing up. The little girl whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose tears I had dried, whose successes I had celebrated, had looked me in the eye and said, "Better than nothing, right?" As if I should be grateful for a mattress on a laundry room floor. Morning came after a fitful sleep. I emerged from my room to find the kitchen bustling with activity. Brianna was eating cereal at the island while Tiffany packed lunches. "Good morning, Mom," Tiffany said cheerfully, as if nothing had changed. "Coffee's ready if you want some." I said nothing, moving stiffly to pour myself a cup. My body ached from the uncomfortable sleeping arrangement, and my heart felt hollow. "How did you sleep?" Craig asked, not looking up from his phone as he entered the kitchen. The casual cruelty of the question made me pause. Was he mocking me, or was he truly oblivious to the inhumanity of what they had done? "Fine," I lied, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of knowing how much I was suffering. "Great," he replied absently. "By the way, we're having company tonight. The Hendersons are coming for dinner around 7. "The Hendersons?" I asked, confused. Linda and Robert Henderson had been friends with Howard and me for over 30 years. "Yes," Tiffany interjected. "And it would be best if you stayed in your room during dinner. The table only seats 6 comfortably, and we don't want to crowd everyone."
Ist daher, disbelieving.
"Linda and Robert are my friends. They've been coming to this house for dinner since before you were born." Tiffany sighed dramatically. "Mom, please don't make this difficult. We've already planned everything. I'll bring you a plate, of course. I'm not a dog to be fed in another room while you entertain," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Now you're just being dramatic," Tiffany said dismissively. "Nobody said anything about you being a dog. We're trying to have a nice dinner with friends, and frankly, you've been unpredictable lately. It's better this way." Later that day, I tried reasoning with Tiffany again, appealing to her sense of decency. "Honey, I can't keep sleeping in the laundry room. It's not appropriate or safe. There's no ventilation, and the floor is killing my back." "Mom," she replied with exaggerated patience, "we've been through this. The house division agreement is finalized. Mason needs his own room, and this was the best solution. There are 5 bedrooms in this house," I pointed out. "You, Craig, Mason, and Brianna each have one. What happened to the guest room? We've converted it to a home gym, Craig interjected, walking past. Physical fitness is important. When I attempted to involve Mason and Brianna in the conversation, hoping their young hearts might show more compassion, Tiffany intercepted quickly. Children, go upstairs, she directed firmly. Grandma and I need to talk. After they left, Tiffany's facade dropped momentarily. Stop trying to turn my children against me, she hissed. You're only making things worse for yourself. How could things possibly be worse? I asked. Trust me, she said coldly. They can always get worse. The threat hung in the air between us, and for the first time, I felt genuinely afraid of my own daughter. I retreated to the laundry room, my new prison, and quietly wept. Days passed, and my situation became increasingly desperate. My back and joints ached constantly from sleeping on the floor. The laundry room had no windows, leaving me disoriented about time of day. Privacy was non-existent, with family members barging in at all hours to do laundry, often without acknowledging my presence. Mason was the only one who showed any discomfort with the situation. One evening, he slipped into the laundry room while everyone was occupied elsewhere. Grandma, he whispered, I brought you these. He handed me a small pillow and a candy bar, clearly smuggled from his own room. I'm sorry about everything. The simple kindness nearly broke me. Thank you, sweetheart. I managed, fighting back tears. Mom says you're confused a lot and need special care, he said hesitantly. But you seem fine to me. I am fine, Mason. I'm not confused or incompetent. He glanced nervously at the door. I should go before they notice I'm gone. After he left, I sank onto my mattress, despair washing over me. Even this small interaction would likely be forbidden if Tiffany discovered it. I was being systematically isolated, my relationship with my grandchildren deliberately damaged to support the narrative that I was mentally declining. My weekly phone call with my sister Ruth was scheduled for Thursday evening. Usually, Tiffany hovered nearby during these calls, occasionally interjecting comments about how well they were taking care of me. This time, however, they were all occupied with Brianna's dance recital video playing in the living room, giving me a rare moment of privacy. Ruth, I whispered into the phone, having retreated to the far corner of the laundry room. I need help. Donna, why are you whispering? What's wrong? The dam broke and everything poured out. The house division, the manipulation, the laundry room, bedroom, the isolation. Once I started, I couldn't stop, the words tumbling out between quiet sobs. My God, Ruth gasped when I finished. I'm coming over right now. No, I said quickly. Not now. They'll know I called you. Come tomorrow morning around 10. Tiffany has a hair appointment, and Craig will be at work. Ruth arrived precisely at 10 the next day. When I opened the door, her expression shifted from concern to horror as she took in my appearance. I knew what she was seeing. Dark circles under my eyes, unwashed hair. The same clothes I'd been wearing for days since most of my wardrobe had mysteriously disappeared during the move to the laundry room. Oh, Donna, she breathed, pulling me into a fierce hug. I led her through the house to the laundry room, watching her face as she observed my living conditions. The mattress on the floor. The shower curtain for privacy. The single shelf allotted for my remaining possessions. This is elder abuse, Ruth stated flatly. We're calling the police right now. No, I said firmly, surprising myself with my conviction. Not yet. Ruth looked at me incredulously. Why on earth not? This is criminal. I sat on the edge of my mattress, gesturing for Ruth to join me. Because I have a plan already in motion. Remember what Howard always said about chess? You don't reveal your strategy until you're ready to call checkmate. Ruth's eyes widened as I explained what I had been doing quietly behind the scenes. The night before they moved me to the laundry room, I met with Franklin. He warned me what was coming and helped me protect myself legally. So the house division agreement isn't nearly as binding as Tiffany and Craig believe, I confirmed. And I've already transferred most of my assets to protected trusts they can't touch, even with power of attorney. Relief washed over Ruth's face, followed quickly by determination. Tell me how I can help. We spent the next hour planning, speaking in hushed tones and listening for the sound of Tiffany's return. Ruth took photos of the laundry room and my living conditions, documented my account of events, and promised to return the following day with supplies to make my situation somewhat more bearable. As she was leaving, Ruth turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Howard would be so proud of you, Donna. You're stronger than anyone knows." Her words gave me the courage to endure what was to come. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Howard's memory, for the values we had tried to instill in our daughter, and for my grandchildren who were learning terrible lessons about how to treat the elderly. That night, as I lay on my mattress listening to the rumble of the dryer and the occasional drip from the leaky faucet, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't defeated. And soon, very soon, Tiffany and Craig would learn exactly what happens when you underestimate a woman who's been pushed too far. The night before I was relegated to the laundry room, while Tiffany and Craig slept soundly upstairs, I had slipped out of the house to meet Franklin Davidson at a 24-hour diner 15 minutes away. My hands trembled slightly as I slid into the booth across from him, the gravity of what we were about to discuss weighing heavily on me. "Thank you for meeting me so late," I said, glancing at the clock on the wall showing just past midnight. Franklin, despite the hour, was impeccably dressed in a suit and tie as always. His silver hair was neatly combed, but the deep lines around his eyes betrayed his concern. "Donna, after what you told me on the phone, I'd have met you at 3 in the morning if necessary." He placed a leather portfolio on the table between us. "I've brought everything we need." Franklin had been our family attorney for over 30 years. He had drafted our wills, handled Howard's estate, and guided us through every major legal decision. More than that, he had been Howard's friend, the two of them meeting monthly for chess matches that inevitably turned into hours of conversation. "I should have come to you sooner," I admitted, the shame of my situation burning in my chest. Franklin shook his head firmly. "No self-recrimination tonight. We focus on solutions. First, tell me exactly what's happening at home." I detailed everything, from the initial seemingly reasonable request to formalize living arrangements to the gradually increasing restrictions on my movements and autonomy. The intercepted mail, the whispered conversations about power of attorney, the documented episodes of confusion that were either fabricated or grossly exaggerated. As I spoke, Franklin took meticulous notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he sat back, his expression grave. "This is textbook elder abuse and exploitation," he said quietly. "And I'm afraid I've inadvertently been party to it." "What do you mean?" "The house division agreement." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare display of agitation from the normally composed attorney. "Tiffany approached me weeks ago, claiming you had agreed to the arrangement and wanted everything formalized. I should have insisted on speaking with you privately first." "You couldn't have known," I assured him. "I suspected," he corrected. Something felt wrong, but I allowed professional courtesy to override my instincts. "That ends tonight." Franklin opened his portfolio and spread several documents on the table. 3 weeks ago, after your initial meeting about the house division, I took the liberty of preparing these. Call it an insurance policy. The documents established an irrevocable trust for most of my assets, with Ruth named as trustee should I become incapacitated. A separate document outlined specific conditions under which power of attorney could be granted, with multiple safeguards against coercion or exploitation. "The beauty of this approach," Franklin explained, "is that these papers can be filed without Tiffany's knowledge. The assets will be protected even if she somehow obtains power of attorney." "And the house?" I asked my greatest concern. The home Howard and I had built together was more than property. It was the physical embodiment of our life's work and memories. "The house requires special handling," Franklin acknowledged. "You still own it outright regardless of this division agreement they're pushing. But to be safe, I've prepared a deed that places the house in the same irrevocable trust." We spent the next hour reviewing and signing documents, Franklin explaining each one carefully. By 1:30 in the morning, my financial assets, investments, and property were legally protected from Tiffany and Craig's machinations. "There's one more thing," Franklin said, pulling out a small digital recorder. "I'd like you to make a statement about your current mental state, and the circumstances surrounding this agreement. It may prove useful later. I spoke clearly into the recorder, detailing my full mental competence, the pressure I was under to sign the agreement, and the fact that I was doing so under duress. Franklin then had me perform several cognitive tests, demonstrating my clear reasoning and memory. "Perfect," he said when we finished. "This will be stored securely with the trust documents." As we prepared to leave, Franklin placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Donna, what will you do now? You can't continue living under these conditions." "I need to gather more evidence," I explained. "If I leave now, I may lose my home entirely. And my grandchildren. I can't abandon them to learn that this behavior is acceptable." Franklin nodded slowly. "I understand. But please don't wait too long. These situations rarely improve without intervention." "I won't," I promised. 2 weeks. Give me 2 weeks to document everything. Then we move forward with legal action if necessary. Now, lying on my laundry room mattress 6 days later, I reflected on that midnight meeting. The assets had been transferred, the documents filed. Tiffany and Craig could pressure me to sign anything they wanted. The foundations of their plan had already been dismantled. With Ruth's help, my strategic planning accelerated. The day after her first visit, she returned with several critical items. A prepaid cell phone that Tiffany and Craig wouldn't know about, a small lockbox that could be hidden under my mattress, and most importantly, 3 discrete recording devices disguised as ordinary objects. One looked like a button, another like a pen, and the third like an innocuous wall plug adapter. "These are completely legal in Connecticut," Ruth assured me as she demonstrated how they worked. "Single-party consent means only one person in the conversation needs to know recording is happening." We placed the devices strategically. The button recorder on my cardigan that I wore most days, the pen in the laundry room, and the adapter in the kitchen where many confrontations occurred. Each night, when the house was quiet, I would retrieve the recordings and store them on a small USB drive Ruth had provided. The evidence accumulated quickly. Tiffany openly discussing with Craig how they would handle my finances once they secured power of attorney. Craig making calls to inquire about selling the house once things are settled with the old lady. Vanessa coaching them on how to document behaviors that could support a claim of incompetence. But the most damning recording came 3 days after Ruth's visit. I had emerged from the laundry room to make myself lunch, only to find Tiffany already in the kitchen with Vanessa. "Mom, there you are," Tiffany said, her voice syrupy sweet. "Vanessa brought some papers for you to sign. Just routine medical authorization forms." I reviewed the documents carefully, immediately recognizing them as power of attorney forms, not the routine authorizations Tiffany had claimed. "These are power of attorney documents," I stated calmly. Tiffany's smile tightened. "Yes, well, that's just legal terminology. It simply allows me to help manage your affairs and speak to your doctors." "I don't need help managing my affairs," I replied, setting the papers down. "And I can speak to my doctors myself." Tiffany's facade cracked. "Mom, be reasonable. After your episode last week." "What episode?" I challenged. "I haven't had any episode." "You don't remember," she said quickly. "That's exactly the problem. You were confused about what day it was and couldn't find your glasses. Vanessa witnessed it." Vanessa nodded solemnly. "It was concerning, Donna. Short-term memory loss is often the first sign of cognitive decline. The fabrication was so blatant it took my breath away. There had been no episode, no confusion. I had been lucid and clear every day, despite my circumstances. "I'm not signing these," I said firmly, pushing the papers away. What happened next shocked even me. Tiffany slammed her hand on the counter, her expression contorting with rage. "You will sign these papers," she hissed. "Do you think you have a choice? Look at where you're living, Mom. A mattress in the laundry room. I can make things much worse if you don't cooperate." "Are you threatening me?" I asked, the button recorder on my cardigan capturing every word. "I'm explaining reality," Tiffany replied, her voice suddenly calm again, though her eyes remained hard. "You're deteriorating, Mom. Everyone can see it. These papers protect you. Without them, you could end up in a state facility when you inevitably have another, more serious episode." The psychological manipulation was expertly deployed. mixing threats with false concern, gaslighting with emotional blackmail. If I hadn't been prepared, if I hadn't already protected myself legally, I might have given in simply to escape the pressure. Instead, I gathered my strength and said, I need time to think about this. I'd like to review the documents more carefully. Tiffany snatched the papers away. Fine. Be difficult. But these will be signed one way or another. That night, I called Ruth and Franklin on my secret phone, playing them the recording. Franklin's response was immediate. We have enough, he said decisively. This recording alone constitutes elder abuse and coercion. Combined with the living conditions and the other evidence you've gathered, we have a strong case. What's the next step? Ruth asked. A family meeting, I replied, surprising both of them. On my terms this time. Are you sure that's wise? Franklin questioned. We could proceed directly to legal action. I'm sure, I said firmly. Before anything else happens, I want to look my daughter in the eye when she learns that her plan has failed. I want her to understand exactly what she's done and what it's cost her. We set the date for the following Saturday. Ruth would come to the house with Franklin and Nancy Winters, an elder care attorney specializing in exploitation cases. Walter Jenkins, my neighbor who had witnessed some of Tiffany's concerning behavior, agreed to attend as well. The pieces were in place. The evidence was secured. After months of being manipulated, controlled, and abused, I was finally ready to reclaim my home and my dignity. The laundry room mattress would soon be a memory, and Tiffany and Craig would learn that underestimating me had been their greatest mistake. Saturday morning arrived with a sense of electric anticipation. I had slept poorly, my mind racing with thoughts of the confrontation to come. For once, the discomfort of my laundry room mattress was secondary to the nervous energy coursing through me. I emerged earlier than usual, determined to appear calm and collected. In the kitchen, I found Tiffany already preparing breakfast, humming cheerfully as she mixed pancake batter. Good morning, Mom, she greeted, her voice falsely bright. Beautiful day, isn't it? Yes, it is, I agreed, pouring myself a cup of coffee. By the way, I've invited Ruth over this afternoon. I hope that's all right. Tiffany's spatula paused mid-flip. Ruth? Why? She's my sister, I replied simply. I'd like to see her. You should have checked with me first, Tiffany said, her cheerful mask slipping slightly. We have plans today. What plans? Craig and I are taking the kids to the lake. We discussed this yesterday. No, we didn't, I said firmly. And regardless, Ruth is coming at 2. She's bringing a few people with her. Tiffany set down the spatula, turning to face me fully. What people? Mom, you can't just invite strangers into our home without consulting us. Our home, I repeated, emphasizing the word. This is my home, Tiffany. The home your father and I paid for. The home I still own. Color rose in Tiffany's cheeks. We have an agreement. The house division. Yes, I interrupted. We'll be discussing that agreement this afternoon. 2 o'clock. I turned and walked away before she could respond, feeling her stunned gaze on my back. It was the first time in months I had directly challenged her authority, and the small victory gave me courage for what lay ahead. Throughout the morning, tension built in the house. Tiffany made several phone calls in hushed tones, presumably to Craig, who was out running errands. Mason and Brianna sensed the change in atmosphere, exchanging confused glances as their mother paced anxiously. At 1:30, Craig returned home, immediately closeting himself with Tiffany in their bedroom. Their urgent whispers carried through the house, though I couldn't make out the words. When they emerged 45 minutes later, both wore expressions of forced composure. The doorbell rang precisely at 2 o'clock. I moved to answer it, but Craig stepped in front of me. I'll get it, he said tersely. He opened the door to find Ruth standing there with Franklin Davidson and Nancy Winters, both carrying briefcases. Behind them stood Walter Jenkins, my 70-year-old neighbor whose presence clearly surprised Craig. What is this? He demanded, blocking the doorway. Please invite our guests in, Craig, I said firmly, coming to stand beside him. We have important matters to discuss. Reluctantly, Craig stepped aside. The group entered, and I led everyone to the dining room where I had already set out water glasses and notepads. Tiffany stood frozen in the living room doorway, her expression a mixture of confusion and growing alarm. "Tiffany, Craig," I said, gesturing to the chairs, "please join us." "Mom, what is this about?" Tiffany asked, not moving. "If this is some kind of intervention." "In a manner of speaking, it is," I replied calmly. "Though perhaps not the kind you're thinking of." Once everyone was seated, Franklin took the lead, placing a thick folder on the table. "Mrs. and Mr. Reynolds," he began formally, addressing Tiffany and Craig. "I'm here today in my capacity as Donna's attorney. This is Nancy Winters, who specializes in elder law and protection. We have serious concerns about Donna's living situation and treatment in this home." Craig's posture immediately stiffened. "If you're implying we've mistreated Donna in any way—" "I'm not implying anything," Franklin interrupted smoothly. "I'm stating it directly. We have documented evidence of elder abuse, financial exploitation, and attempted coercion." Tiffany laughed nervously. "This is ridiculous. Mom has been declining cognitively. We've been taking care of her." "By moving her to a mattress on the laundry room floor?" Ruth interjected, her voice sharp with anger. "That was a temporary arrangement," Tiffany insisted. "For her safety. Perhaps you could explain how sleeping on a concrete floor without ventilation or proper facilities contributes to your mother's safety," Nancy suggested, her tone professional but pointed. As Tiffany stumbled through an explanation about space constraints and monitoring needs, I noticed Mason and Brianna hovering in the hallway, clearly listening. I caught Mason's eye and nodded slightly, acknowledging his presence. His expression was troubled, torn between loyalty to his parents and the obvious wrongness of what was unfolding. Franklin opened his folder and began presenting evidence methodically. The photos Ruth had taken of my laundry room bedroom. Documentation of my financial assets being researched by Craig. Transcripts of recorded conversations where Tiffany and Craig discussed obtaining power of attorney through questionable means. With each new piece of evidence, Tiffany and Craig's expressions shifted from defensive confidence to growing alarm. When Franklin played the audio recording of Tiffany threatening me in the kitchen, her face drained of color. "You recorded me?" she whispered, looking at me with betrayal in her eyes. "Your own daughter?" "You threatened me," I replied steadily. "Your own mother." Craig attempted to regain control of the situation. "These recordings were made without our knowledge or consent. They're inadmissible." "Connecticut is a single-party consent state," Nancy explained. "These recordings are perfectly legal and admissible in both civil and criminal proceedings." "Criminal?" Tiffany echoed, her voice rising. "You're threatening criminal charges against us for taking care of my declining mother?" "I am not declining," I stated clearly, looking directly at my daughter. "I have been evaluated by 2 independent physicians in the past week, both of whom have confirmed my full cognitive competence. The narrative you've been constructing about my mental state is false, and we have evidence suggesting it was deliberately fabricated to gain control of my assets." At this point, Franklin placed another document on the table. "This is particularly concerning. A draft petition for guardianship prepared by Mr. Reynolds 3 weeks ago, citing cognitive impairment that we now know does not exist." Craig's face flushed dark red. "Where did you get that? You had no right." "It was in my filing cabinet," I said quietly. "The one you thought I couldn't access." The confrontation continued for nearly 2 hours, with Franklin and Nancy methodically presenting evidence while Tiffany and Craig's defenses crumbled. Their attempts to justify their actions grew increasingly desperate and contradictory. Finally, Franklin moved to the critical revelation. "There's one more thing you should know. The assets you've been so interested in, including this house, were transferred to an irrevocable trust weeks ago. Even if you had succeeded in obtaining power of attorney, you would have gained control of virtually nothing." Tiffany's jaw dropped. "That's not possible. When did you?" "The night before you moved me to the laundry room," I explained. "Franklin warned me what was coming after your last visit to his office." "You can't do that," Craig exploded, pounding his fist on the table. "Those assets belong to me," I finished firmly. "They are mine to manage as I see fit." and I saw fit to protect them from exploitation. The room fell silent as the full implications sank in. Months of planning, manipulation, and cruel treatment had amounted to nothing. Not only had they failed to gain control of my assets, but they had exposed themselves to potential legal consequences. Nancy cleared her throat and laid out the terms of what would happen next. Donna has decided not to press criminal charges at this time, primarily out of concern for her grandchildren. However, this restraint is contingent upon your immediate compliance with the following conditions. She outlined the requirements. Tiffany and Craig would vacate the house within 30 days. The house division agreement was null and void due to coercion and misrepresentation. All of my belongings would be returned immediately, and I would resume occupancy of my bedroom today. This is our home too, Tiffany protested weakly. Where are we supposed to go? You own a house in Fairfield, I reminded her. The one you moved out of to come here. We rented it out, Craig admitted reluctantly. The lease isn't up for another 8 months. That's unfortunate, Franklin replied without sympathy. But it's not Donna's problem to solve. As the meeting concluded, I noticed Mason still standing in the hallway, his sister no longer beside him. His eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of shame and resolution. Before following his parents upstairs, he mouthed 2 words. I'm sorry. That single silent apology meant more to me than all the legal victories combined. In that moment I realized that while the confrontation had been necessary, the real challenge lay ahead. Healing the deep wounds this ordeal had inflicted on our family. As Ruth helped me move my belongings back to my bedroom, the full emotional weight of what had transpired finally hit me. I sat on the edge of my bed, my real bed, and allowed myself to cry for the first time since this nightmare began. They weren't tears of sadness or even relief, but complex emotions that defied simple categorization. Grief for the daughter I thought I knew. Hope for the grandson showing signs of breaking the cycle. And yes, a measure of satisfaction at having stood up for myself when it mattered most. The house felt different now, the power dynamics permanently altered. Tiffany and Craig moved silently through the rooms, avoiding eye contact with me. But beyond the immediate tension, I sensed something else. The first tentative steps toward whatever our family would become next. The 30 days following the confrontation passed in a blur of activity and emotion. Tiffany and Craig spent most of their time away from the house, presumably searching for temporary accommodations until their Fairfield property became available again. When they were home, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Conversations were limited to practical matters, delivered in clipped tones that barely concealed their resentment. The most surprising development came 3 days after the meeting, when Mason knocked on my bedroom door one evening. "Grandma, can I talk to you?" he asked hesitantly. I welcomed him in, noticing how he seemed both younger and older than his 15 years as he perched awkwardly on the edge of my reading chair. "I want to stay with you," he blurted out after a moment of silence. "When Mom and Dad move out. Just until things calm down." His request stunned me. "Have you discussed this with your parents?" Mason nodded, studying his hands. "Dad says I'm betraying the family. Mom cried and said I was choosing you over her." He looked up, his eyes troubled but determined. "But I saw what they did to you. It wasn't right." I moved to sit beside him, taking his hands in mine. "Mason, I would love to have you stay, but I don't want to come between you and your parents." "You're not," he insisted. "They did that themselves." After several fraught family discussions mediated by Dr. Eleanor Bennett, a family therapist Nancy had recommended, we reached an agreement. Mason would split his time between my home and his parents' new apartment, with the arrangement to be reassessed after 3 months. Brianna's reaction was quite different. She remained firmly aligned with her mother, viewing me as the villain who had disrupted their lives. Her once affectionate demeanor toward me turned cold and accusatory. During one particularly difficult exchange, she lashed out with words that clearly echoed Tiffany's perspective. "You tricked them," she charged, her 12-year-old face flushed with righteous indignation. "You pretended to be weak so they would take care of you, and then you stole our home." Rather than defending myself or correcting her misunderstanding, I simply hugged her, holding on even as she remained stiff in my embrace. "I love you, Brianna," I whispered. That will never change no matter what. The day Tiffany and Craig moved out was somber rather than triumphant. I stood in the driveway watching as they loaded the last of their belongings into a moving truck, feeling a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and resolve. When Tiffany approached me to hand over her house keys, our eyes met briefly. I never wanted it to come to this, I told her softly. She paused, something unreadable flickering across her face. Neither did I, Mom. But here we are. With that ambiguous statement hanging between us, she turned and walked away, helping Brianna into their car without a backward glance. The process of reclaiming and restoring my home began immediately. With Ruth's help, I rearranged furniture, removed the exercise equipment from the guest room, and gradually erased the physical reminders of those difficult months. Mason assisted on the weekends. He stayed with me, his enthusiasm for the project suggesting it might be therapeutic for him as well. "Can we plant new flowers in the garden?" he asked one Saturday morning. Grandpa Howard always kept it so colorful. The mention of Howard brought both pain and warmth. "He would have loved that you remember his garden," I told Mason. "And yes, we absolutely can plant new flowers." Working together in the garden became our ritual, a quiet space where Mason occasionally shared his feelings about the family fracture. "Do you think Mom and Dad will ever understand what they did wrong?" he asked one afternoon as we planted marigolds. I considered my answer carefully. "I hope so, sweetheart. Understanding is the first step toward change." "And forgiveness?" he pressed, suddenly sounding much older than his years. "Forgiveness is complicated," I admitted. "It doesn't mean forgetting or pretending nothing happened. It means finding a way forward that isn't consumed by anger." "Are you still angry with them?" I paused, dirt still clinging to my gardening gloves. "Sometimes. But mostly I'm sad about what we've all lost, and hopeful that we might build something new and better." 3 months after the confrontation, Dr. Eleanor suggested a family counseling session to establish new boundaries. I arrived at her office with trepidation, unsure of what to expect from Tiffany and Craig. To my surprise, they seemed less hostile than I had anticipated, perhaps humbled by the reality of their situation. "The goal today isn't to rehash past grievances," Dr. Eleanor explained as we sat in her comfortably appointed office. "It's to establish a framework for moving forward with mutual respect." Tiffany spoke first, her voice controlled but not cold. "I want to be clear that I still believe we were acting in Mom's best interests, regardless of how things appeared." I bit back the instinctive retort, remembering Dr. Eleanor's advice about choosing my battles. Craig added, "However, we recognize that certain decisions and actions were inappropriate. The sleeping arrangements in particular. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement which felt like progress." The session established basic parameters for our interactions going forward. Mason would continue his split living arrangement until the end of the school year, at which point we would reassess. Brianna would visit me 1 weekend per month, with additional visits if she wished. Holidays would be celebrated separately this year, with the possibility of joint celebrations in the future if relations improved. As we prepared to leave, Tiffany hesitated at the door. "Mom, I've been meaning to ask, how did you know to transfer the assets when you did?" I considered my daughter carefully, wondering if this was genuine curiosity or an attempt to understand where her plan had failed. "I listened to my instincts," I answered simply, "and to the people who truly had my best interests at heart." In the months that followed, I found a new rhythm to my life. With Franklin's guidance, I created a proper estate plan with clear directives and protections. I joined a support group for seniors who had experienced family exploitation, finding both comfort and purpose in sharing my story to help others. My relationship with Tiffany remained complex and somewhat distant, but civil. Our weekly phone calls were cordial if not warm. Brianna gradually softened toward me, especially after Mason shared with her some of our grandfather's stories that I had passed on to him during our gardening sessions. The most unexpected development came 6 months after the confrontation, when my neighbor Walter Jenkins began joining Mason and me for our weekend gardening projects. His knowledge of perennials complemented my expertise with vegetables, and his kind, steady presence added something valuable to our household routine. When he eventually asked me to dinner, just the two of us, I surprised myself by accepting without hesitation. Life has a way of offering new beginnings when you least expect them. I told Ruth on the phone after my third dinner with Walter. Howard would approve, she replied warmly. He always said you were too vibrant to ever be alone. A year after being relegated to that laundry room mattress, I stood in my garden, now bursting with color and life, and reflected on the journey. The painful experience had stripped away illusions, but had also revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed. It had damaged family bonds but created space for new ones to form. Most importantly, it had taught me that standing up for myself wasn't selfish or cruel, but necessary and right. Mason, now 16 and growing into a thoughtful young man, joined me in the garden that afternoon. "Do you ever regret how everything happened, Grandma?" he asked as we deadhead the roses. I considered the question carefully. "I regret that it became necessary," I answered. "I regret the pain it caused everyone, especially you and Brianna. But I don't regret reclaiming my dignity and my home." He nodded thoughtfully. "I'm learning a lot from you, about boundaries and self-respect." "Those are valuable lessons," I agreed. "Ones I wish I'd learned earlier in life." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden Howard and I had loved so much, I felt a sense of peace that had been elusive for too long. The house behind me was once again truly my home. The garden around me was flourishing under renewed care. And despite everything, love remained at the center of my life, changed perhaps but not diminished. Sometimes the hardest lessons come from those closest to us. Sometimes standing firm in your own worth means facing painful truths about those you love. And sometimes the path to healing begins with a simple, powerful word: no. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who weren't treating you right? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more real-life experiences that might help others going through similar situations. Remember, it's never too late to reclaim your dignity and set healthy boundaries. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I wish you the courage to honor your own worth in every relationship in your life. Share this with someone who might need to hear this message today.